Welcome to episode 4 of Autistic FM. I am absolutely psyched for today's guest, Jen, a social worker from the Netherlands, who's deeply immersed in the neurodivergent world. In this conversation, we explored a ton of powerful topics. I'm particularly excited about our conversation about the hidden costs of masking and how they can lead to burnout and loss of self. And also the concept of autistic joy, those moments of pure delight that come from being completely in tune with what lights you up. That's quite enough for me, I think. Let's roll tape. Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. Would you start by sharing your name and your pronouns?
Yes. So my name is Jen, and I am identifying with she, her pronouns.
Beautiful. Thank you. And where in the world are you?
The Netherlands.
Awesome. We were just talking before I started recording. I was born in the Netherlands. I lived there for 6 years. So I'm like a smidge of Dutch hidden somewhere in the back of my brain, which is super fun. When and how did you realize that you might be neurodivergent?
Good question. At first, I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent, actually. I've always known that I did some things differently from other people. So, for example, I was a very active thinker, and adults often told me that I was very wise for my age. And I started analyzing how the world worked from a very young age, just in a different way that children used to do it. So more in a logical sense. And I don't know if you're familiar with this feeling, but I really felt like an alien that crash landed on the wrong planet. So that's how it really felt for me. A lot of people used to do things that were very hard for me, and they made it look so easy. I especially had trouble with making friends, socializing, but I just masked my way through it. Like, in hindsight, I know that it was masking, but back then I thought I was just an awkward and shy kid. I don't know. Um, but then actually later on, I really faced some challenges. Like, for example, in high school, I ended up dropping out a few times, and the studies I pursued after that were full of ups and downs. I got sick a lot. And I think that was because I couldn't really handle the pressure and all the changes, because in high school, like in the Netherlands, you have to switch class every hour, and that was really a lot. Um, and yeah, it was also about adapting to a lot of invisible rules. I couldn't really do that. Later on, I realized that there was something going on, but I really didn't know a lot about neurodivergence. And I went to a few mental health professionals, and they gave me various diagnoses, which I'm not really comfortable sharing.
Thank you for looking after yourself.
Yeah. So, but I've noticed that none of them really fit. Something
Mhm.
was off every time. And I was like, I don't know, this is not it.
Right.
So then I think about 5 years ago, a good friend suggested that I might be autistic. And they, as a self identified autistic, had a lot of knowledge about autism. But also, um, they knew that it didn't present typically with everyone. So that was also
Mhm.
the case for me. And at first, I was like, nah, that can't be true, because I was used to the stereotypical image of autism, if that makes sense. And
Yep.
mm, yeah, and my sister is also autistic, and she's very like outwardly expressive, and she often had visible meltdowns. And for me, everything was more internally.
Mhm.
Mm, and it was basically invisible to others, or so it seemed, because my friends seemed to know. Um,
Yeah.
I came across as someone that didn't really have problems, I think. Um, so yeah, this whole thing about that friend telling me like you might be autistic got me really curious to learn more about autism. And when I did that, because I started like this huge investigation, I finally realized that yeah, I actually can be autistic. Yeah.
Mm. So many things about what you just said made me go, "Yep, me too. Yeah, yeah, that." Um, It's crazy making. I had a conversation this week with a person who is a clinical psychiatrist and works with autistic people. And she was like, hey, I don't, and then she was like, you mentioned that you're autistic and I don't see that in you. And I was like, uh-huh. We got to talking in great depth about how autism is diagnosed. And she was like, well, I mostly work with kids and people who have high support needs. Like, yeah, that makes sense. And I said to her something I've actually said on this podcast before, which is, the diagnostic criteria are how annoying I am to other people. And she got really quiet and she was like, oh, I'm going to sit with that. And I was like, what a beautiful response. It wasn't like an invalidation, but it was like, hey, and of course it's also a little scary, like somebody who works in the field who has no idea, basically, honestly.
Mhm.
That made
Yeah.
me feel very uncomfortable. So, because I've just mentioned diagnoses, are you formally diagnosed, self-diagnosed, self-identified? Like, how do you interact with your neurodivergence?
Well, so I am self-identified, at least for now, I guess, because I'm going to start a diagnostic process like soon.
Hmm.
But for me personally, I think self-diagnosis and self-identification is valid. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of people do extensive research to get to know themselves, and it just doesn't come out of thin air, right? That someone thinks that,
Right,
hey, I'm autistic. Um,
right.
so yeah, self-identified.
What was that process like for you? I mean, you talked a little bit about your friend mentioning, "Hey, maybe you're autistic." Like, was there like an aha moment where you're like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds right," or was it like a gradual process?
I think it was more gradually, um, because like I said before, I didn't really believe that I could be autistic because, well, if you would look at me from an outsider's perspective, you would think I'm really well spoken and that I'm just like easily managing everything. But I knew that that wasn't the case. So I started to look up the traits online. And actually, that's really hard and inaccessible because a lot of the traits are, you can interpret them in various ways.
Hmm.
Um, and they are really written from an outside perspective, if that makes sense. So from a neurotypical lens.
Hmm.
And from that point, I started to search more and more. I also looked up a lot of videos and especially videos about late diagnosed autistic women.
Hmm.
And I just really felt like more and more that I could relate. Um, so, but I think there wasn't really a point that I said, like, yeah, now I know it for sure, because till this very day, I really have some doubts. Um,
Right,
I don't know, some kind of imposter syndrome, I think.
right.
So, yeah.
I hear you, and brings up a lot of feelings for me. Uh, and of course, like many autistic people, I have alexithymia, so I know I'm having feelings, but I have no idea what they are. So I'm having
Makes
this moment of
sense.
like, oh, these feelings are crunchy, but I don't know what crunchy feelings like. I don't know what that means.
Mm,
Sounds very, very familiar.
what actually helped me more was that I started to work with autistic people as well. I am a
Hmm.
social worker and, well, I work with them and I started to relate more and more.
Right.
Um, and it was really strange, because I started to wonder sometimes even like, what makes it so that I am at the other side of the table if I can
Right.
relate that much to them? I mean, it's totally like, I think it's a good thing that I can relate because it makes me better at my job, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because I have that like professional side and my own experience in one. I just think like it's a really weird feeling if you finally feel like represented and that you get that familiar feeling, I guess.
Yeah.
After all these years. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really a hard one for me. Uh, I've been masking obviously my whole life. Or I call it humaning, and sometimes my humaning functions are broken. And the most the craziest moment for me was I caught COVID a few years ago. And the brain fog that came from COVID, like my brain slowed down. And it made me realize that my masking only works because I'm incredibly smart. And when I stop being smart, my mask breaks. And I had this moment of like, I can't leave the house. I don't know. Like, I can't trust myself to talk to people. Like, I'm going to go nonverbal in the shop if somebody asks me anything about anything. And so I started rehearsing. Okay, what could that possibly ask me in a shop? Give me your card. Would you like a bag? Whatever, right? And then
Mm.
I went to the shop and wanted to buy something. And I brought it to the counter and they asked me a question. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this question. Like, I haven't practiced this part. And then I ran out of the shop. I was like, I panicked and I ran out. And that was
Mhm.
really the moment for me where I was like, oh, like I know a lot of people who have had COVID and who have brain fog who are still able to go to a shop, you know? I was like,
Right.
oh yeah, there is something going on with my brain here. I'm excited to talk with you about masking and unmasking specifically. I mean, we've mentioned a few different ways of masking. And could you, in your own words, explain what a mask is and how you employ one, if you can find an example?
Yeah. And I realized that immediately that's a really complicated one, right? Because, and this is a realization that I had like really recently that masking isn't something that needs to be taken literal, if that makes sense. So for me personally, my mask feels really like ingrained with who I am, like intertwined. I think that's a better
Hmm.
word. Um, I feel like masking is putting out the more extroverted version of me than I am. And
Hmm.
for me, it's definitely about making the other person feel like seen and comfortable. So with masking, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to tune in into someone else's needs and you really try to, um, I don't know, gauge how other people feel and
Hmm.
especially how they feel about me. Because essentially I want to be liked because my fear is that if I show my autistic traits or I unmask more, that people will not like the real me or reject me.
Hmm.
So I think that's where the mask comes in to like protect myself from that.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think.
In there, there's a couple of really interesting quirks, right? For me, I think it's less about being liked and more about fitting in. And I know that's a subtle difference, but, um, and it's just about safety for me. Like, I feel unsafe when I don't fit in. Um, and I was bullied a lot and I had a lot of challenges with not fitting in. Um, and the thing I'm trying to unpick now, like, I don't know where my masks end and where I begin.
I can relate.
And so when somebody says, show me the real you, I was like, motherfucker, I don't know what the real me is. I would love to show you. And I'm like, I get angry because I'm just, come on. I like, thank you for the invitation, but I don't know. And
That's
this has
really
actually
hard.
been
Yeah.
really hard in relationships, right? Like romantic relationships and even friendships. The people you let the closest, I want to be more and more unmasked with. But in a way, it's a bait and switch, right? The higher they got to know, suddenly is a different person once they got to know me because I'm finally like willing to let the mask down.
I actually like lost a friendship, I think, over that essentially because I was doing more of me. I
Hmm.
think. But I get what you're saying. It's like also a really hard process to like identify what is you and what's the mask or it's really hard to see the difference between the two, because I don't feel like, for me personally, that masking is like pretending I am like a whole different person, but it's
Mhm.
like taking some traits and just making them more enhanced, like, or polite, or
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really sophisticated, if it makes sense. Like,
Nuance.
yeah, nuance. So if I go to work, I'm being like more extroverted and like more aware of the body movements and, well, how
Mhm.
people react, so that I can tune into that. But when I come home, it's not necessarily that I like drop the mask and all of a sudden be like, okay, well, I'm a whole different version of me. But at the
Right.
same time, it is very different, because when I'm at home, I feel more free to like stim or to, yeah, let some of my autistic traits come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you a hard question. Do you mask for you or do you mask for other people? Like who benefits from the masking?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I think, now that I come to think about it, I think it's more about me, essentially, because I want to like view myself in a lens that is actually, and I feel it's really hard to say this, but it's really ableist in a sense, because I want to see like a perfect version of me, like maybe even like a neurotypical version of me. And I don't say that it's better, but I'm so used to that being like the standard,
Yeah.
that I think I want to live up to that standard for myself.
Right.
Um, but also for the other person, I think, but it's hard to like explain. Yeah. Yeah.
You're still. I don't know how I would answer that question, to be honest. Like, I don't know who I mask for. Maybe it's in part for me because when I fit in more or when I pass as neurotypical, um, I feel safer. And the world doesn't isn't as spiky, right? If I'm fully me, I might walk around making noises. I make noises all the time. Like when I'm happy, I
Yeah.
get super like, "Wee!" Or if I'm sad, I might just sit there and growl. But you can't sit in the bus and growl, right? It's like I want to,
Yeah.
and it's part of me is like it's easier to repress that part of me and not have people look at me weird on the bus.
Yeah.
And I think when I go for long enough stretches without going through my stims or like suppressing, I have a very strong sense of justice. And many neurodivergent people do. I hate things
Yeah.
that are unfair. It means I often speak up. Like, hey,
Mhm.
asshole, that was racist. Or hey, you can't say that to a woman. Or hey, did you ask for consent for the thing you just did? Don't be
Thank
a
you
dick
for
about it.
doing
Just,
that.
but
Yeah.
thank you. I
And I
think a
feel
lot of
like,
that is so culturally driven. Like if you walk
yeah.
around in India, men who are friends often hold hands. It's a totally normal thing. Seeing
Yeah.
two men holding hands on the street where I live, and I think where you live, you make a bunch of
Yeah.
assumptions about it, right? And so if you are two Indian men who's visiting America and you're walking around holding hands, you might choose not to, right? And so you're choosing to conform to cultural norms. And I think
Yeah.
in a way, that is what masking is in a way, except the cultural norms that you and I are trying to conform to, like for me, it makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable because I'm suppressing something about me that is fundamentally me.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I have the same thing. And I think that, um in a way, the longer you mask, and that's also the sad reality, right? That you don't even get in touch with that feeling anymore.
Mhm.
That you sometimes think like, this is just who I am, but deep down you know that there is friction. And you know
Yeah.
that there are like, for example, because I also talked to a therapist and we got to explore if I suppress any stims, because before that I wasn't aware that I was suppressing anything. Like I was like,
Right.
no, I don't ever do that. And when I went to England to an autistic conference, but I will come back to that later, I hope. I really like discovered that there is a lot of stims that I am suppressing, and that when I am actually free to do these, I do feel more regulated. And it's like such a different reality if you can do that all of a sudden.
If you're comfortable sharing, what are some stems that you sense you're repressing?
Yeah, well, I sometimes rock back and forth. It really regulates me. Also, if I'm laying in bed, I just like to rock back and forth to get myself asleep. Um, yeah, I think I have some vocal stims. I'm still exploring that one because I don't really know which one is echolalia, so the repeating of words and
Hmm.
phrases, or if it's a stim, maybe both. I don't know. Um, yeah, I think a lot of things like movement that I repressed because I felt like when I'm around people, I always felt like I had to sit still. And I was so focused on that that I didn't even know that I was doing it. And now that I come to it, when I was younger, I also used to like run around or spin in circles. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, or just do stuff like that. But it was like, I don't know. I felt like I got pretty aware of it that I did it. And some people were like later on mentioning it, making comments about
Right.
it. And that's when I like
You
stopped.
stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like I feel like my parents kind of don't want to believe that I'm autistic.
Right.
Because they don't
Why?
see it
If
as
I may
much, right?
ask. Yeah.
Um, you may ask, uh, and I think they're more open to it now. I don't know. I should ask. I don't know if it's true. Like that's just a feeling I have. I need to check that with them. And I also don't know why. So I don't know on two different levels is my answer. But I have memories of them saying, why do you walk on your toes all the time? Why are you fidgeting all the time? Put that pen down. You're making me nervous. And things like stop wiggling your leg. And those are all like super common stims, right? So
Yeah.
they told me not to stim for various reasons.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm like, well, we're not sure. We don't really see it. It's like, you have literally told me off for stuff that are very well known autistic expressions
For me personally, I think my mom really like she knew how autism could present
because of your
autistic.
sister. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think she just knew one type of autism.
Uh-huh.
Um and because my sister was actually like familiar as the troublemaker, and it caused a lot of, well, discomfort in our family. Um
Uh-huh.
but now I finally start to understand, right, that what she had were meltdowns and that she wasn't really understood. Um but since she presented really visibly, my mom didn't know that I could be, but I think she would be open to it, but she simply didn't have the knowledge, if that
Right.
makes sense. And the complaint that she had was always that mental health professionals didn't really, um how do you say that, like, involve parents in
Hmm.
like explaining what it means. So she
Hmm.
didn't really have any idea. So, and a lot of
Yeah.
like the information about autism is also very, like what I said earlier, I think it's really presented in a stereotypical way, sometimes even. So it's really hard to like spot it in someone who is already high masking.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think a lot of the research around autism has been in situations that are either people who are very high support needs. And so if that's not true for you, then a whole bunch of the diagnostic criteria and the ways of recognizing it fall away. And then it's mostly young, white, fluent boys, right? And so if you don't fall in any of those categories, people don't know to recognize it. And I
Yep.
think it's fascinating how, so don't share more than you're willing or comfortable sharing, but is your sister older or younger than you?
She's older.
Okay. So she's a bit older than you. And how does it feel that it sounds like your sister did get diagnosed and got some support and you didn't? Do you have any sort of feelings about that?
In a sense, like, I think I got the support I needed because I went to a lot of mental health professionals and I was talking about my
Hmm.
problems. But the fact that it was missed, that is what stings. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you clearly saw this and this and this in me, and I actually told you what was going on, and you couldn't, like, possibly even suggest it. I
Right.
think that's, like, especially if it, like, comes out in my diagnostic process right now, which I'm also
Right.
worried about because since of how I present. Um,
Right.
but if it does, I think that will be a whole different grieving process in a way.
Like if it turns out that you are or not.
If they give me the validation that I actually,
Right.
like, am autistic because I know it myself, but when a professional sees it while they, like, managed to didn't see it for a lot of years, that's something else in a way.
Yeah.
Just for my feeling, yeah.
No, I get that. I'm in the middle of doing a diagnostic process as well myself. Part of
Okay.
me is scared of getting diagnosed, and part of me is scared of not getting diagnosed. Right? It's like, oh, why? And part of me is like, why do I care? Like I
Yep.
know, and all the things that people do to make life easier as an autistic person, all of those things work for me. So it doesn't really matter if I'm diagnosable or not. It's like, hey, my toe hurts and I'm taking vitamin C and somehow my toe doesn't hurt. If somebody tells you that's not how you fix a painful toe, it's like, well, but it works. Like, and it
Yeah.
doesn't harm. So, like, what is the problem here? Right. I
Yeah.
think about it a little bit that way. Now, if there were drugs for autism or to deal with any aspect of autism, that would be a different thing, right? That you need to make sure you get a good diagnosis and you get the right prescription, yada, yada, yada. But there's no drugs.
I especially see in the Netherlands, I think kind of often is that a lot of people, like, tend to really have a negative response when you say, like, you're self-identified or you just think that you're autistic because
Right.
then all of a sudden there could be, like, 2 responses that happen, like, or they say,
Right.
like, everyone is a little bit autistic, or they are like, yeah, right, and they are like, um, I don't know, like, how could you say that? Like, you are not
Right.
diagnosed, so, there's, like, really a weird feeling around that, and I didn't
Yeah.
experience that in England, for example. It's really, like, I don't
Interesting.
know, I cannot speak for the whole population, of course, but even, like, in the Netherlands, in autistic communities, I came across people that say these ableist things. And in
Hmm.
England, it was really different, and everyone was like, "I don't care. Like, you got to understand yourself better, and that's what matters."
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No kidding. And it's so, I think it's just, I'm having 1,000 thoughts right now.
Familiar.
Well, for me, it touches like a lot of things that have nothing to do with autism, right? For me, it's like, how accepting are you able to be of other people? Like, and it touches homophobia, it touches racism, it touches ableism, it touches all the isms. And like, I am blessed with a extraordinary brain. I am blessed with being able to be very eloquent and being able to hold down a job. And so are you, right? I heard a statistic that 80% of autistic people are not able to hold down a job. And
Yeah.
that just makes me so sad. And if you have super high support needs, I get it, right? But I think for a lot of people, my suspicion is that they could totally have a job and be productive if they wanted to, if they were just allowed to be weird. Like, hey, don't put me in an office where the coffee machine is making sounds over there and the light is buzzing over here. And whenever I go to the bathroom, it doesn't get cleaned enough and I'll deal with the smell. So I can't use the office bathroom. So I have to go to a restaurant nearby to go to the bathroom. And the restaurant staff thinks I'm weird and that's weird. And I'm like, I'm having to navigate in this, like, I can totally do the job, but the
Yeah.
entire environment is trying to kill me.
I really get this feeling like a lot of us could have a few special interests which we could really become good at. And well, that could be monetized in a way, but it's just that the environment is like responding differently when you all of a sudden that you say that you have special needs or accommodations. And it's not even like, to me, that's special because we just need more of certain things that are already pretty normal, in my opinion, to ask. So
Right.
we might need more breaks, or we might not want to look at you when we have a conversation, or like you said, we just need a different kind of environment. Um, but just because a lot of people are like immediately hesitant, and the one I've heard often is, yeah, well, we cannot do that for you because equal treatments. But it's not about equality. Like when you're disabled, you just need more things or different things.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not hard, I think, to make that happen in the workplace.
Yeah, totally. There's this old example that people use about urban design, which is the the ADA, the American Disability Act, I think it is, mandated that there's curb cuts, right? So wheelchair
Mm.
users can get up and down from sidewalks.
Yeah.
And the side effect was that now it's much easier to push a stroller, as if you're a parent and you have a kid in a stroller. Life became so much easier, so much better, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, wait a minute, what if we thought more about it that way? It's like, you can make it equal if you want to. Just don't play loud music in the office. It's probably better for everyone. Just clean the toilets more often. Probably better for everyone, right? It's like, oh, it's unfair. Like, is it? Because like, here's the thought experiment. If we designed this entire office so it's perfect for me, it's probably tolerable for everybody else. But the other way around is not true. So why don't we design it for me and for people like me? And then everybody's happy. And of course, that doesn't happen because building code and it's expensive, yada, yada. Or maybe, I don't know if it's expensive, but it's not how people are wired to think about how to design living spaces and workspaces and shopping malls and God knows what.
Yeah. But
And
there's
I
a
get
lot
very
of
like the
things
build.
like there's a lot of things like that, right? That
Yeah.
doesn't take that much energy or like changes. For
Yeah.
me
Can you give some examples?
personally, yeah. So when I am at my job, and I just started doing it because I didn't feel comfortable doing it because of the mask. But like since recently, I just fidget at my work. We have
Right.
like this huge bin with all sorts of fidget toys so that the clients can also
Right.
use them. And sometimes when I have a conversation with them, I just grab my fidget and I'm like, okay, let's talk. And they're like, yeah, right. Why not? I'm going to do that as well because apparently I'm not the only client, well, not client, but the only person that needs to like discover what it is or what it looks like to unmask a little. So
Mhm.
me doing that really sets the tone and example for other people as well. And it might
Right.
normalize it even a little bit more.
My school books, uh, my note taking books, what are they called?
Um,
Script.
oh, script, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Notebook, yeah. No,
There you go. Notebook. Wow. That's
right?
literally the first time that's
Yeah.
happened to me in years. Okay. So this, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy the joy of that moment.
You said
Um,
it. You said it all right. Yeah, it was good.
right. That's crazy. Anyway, so in a notebook, my notebooks as a kid were filled with doodles. filled, like every single page, up and down the margins, little shapes, little stars. Like I must have gone through a pen a week just doodling.
I can
And
relate. Yeah.
it's a STEM and it's fine. It doesn't bother anyone. Yes, I have to spend 10 cents per week more on pens, but other than that, like, and I'm like, hey, if it doesn't harm anyone, and I did that at work too. And people were like, stop doodling. And I was like, okay, sorry. I didn't realize that was inappropriate.
Yeah, they see it as a sign as from disinterest, right? Like
Right.
that you're not interested.
Yeah. You're bored.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I stopped doodling. I didn't doodle again. I haven't doodled since actually. But what I had the super clear memory of sitting in this TV station. I was a TV producer for a while, sitting in this TV station, just doodling as we were having a meeting, waiting for me to have to say my thing. I was really nervous because I was about to deliver some bad news.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so nervous. I was like, oh, I'm going to give this bad news and nobody will like me. And it makes sense because I'm the bearer of bad news, right? I had that whole thing happening in my brain. And I was doodling, doodling, doodling. And the guy sitting across from me was like, will you stop that? Like, pay attention. And I was like, oh, I was paying attention, right? And what I should have done is like, ask me any question. I paid attention. Don't be an asshole. Like, this doesn't harm anyone, right? And I was young. I was like, I don't know how old I was, but I didn't know I was stimming for one thing. If I knew that this was like a way to deal with my inner world, I would have been much more fierce in defending myself. But I
Right.
thought it was just an annoyance for no good reason. And it turns out, no, there was a really good reason why I was doodling.
Oh man. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that experience of like being called out for something that is like pretty normal or like even necessary for you to actually be more focused and engaged in the conversation you're having, right? Because
Right.
like I just only figured out that I don't like to give that much eye contact than I used to do. But
Yeah.
I just got this one comment about someone that said to me like, just look at me, you know? Why are you not looking at me? And then all of a sudden was
Right.
like hyper conscious. Like there's a word for
Yeah.
that. I don't know what it is. When you like experience trauma and you're like hyper aware,
Oh,
like
yes. Hypervigilance.
hypervigilance. Yeah, that's what happened like a lot. It's really hard because I feel like that's like the more you have to pay attention to what people say, the more you are like, I don't know, not wanting to get the mask off. Or you want to, but like, I don't know, more resistant to it.
Yeah. No,
It's
I
really,
feel
I
that.
can
I'm
feel it in my
feeling that
body
viscerally.
actually. Yeah, I can
Me
really
too.
feel it.
Just now, I'm like, oh.
It's like freezing, fawning response that's happening in your body, right?
Yeah. What do you
Yeah.
do when that happens to you? Do you have
Um,
tools?
yeah. So what I learned from my therapist, and she's a neurodivergent affirming therapist, so that's really I'm really blessed with having her in my life because finally someone that
Yeah.
understands. She actually equipped me with a lot of tools from acceptance and commitment therapy, so ACT.
So I just wanted to butt in quickly with an aside about ACT, because it's pretty interesting and I hadn't heard of it used specifically in the context of neuroaffirmative therapy. So acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is all about learning to roll with life's punches instead of getting stuck fighting them. The core idea is pretty simple. Trying to push away negative thoughts and feelings often just makes them worse. And so ACT encourages you to stop battling your emotions and start accepting them as part of being human. Now, that doesn't mean giving up or letting pain take over, but it just means making peace with those tough moments so you can focus on the stuff that really matters to you. ACT has 6 main principles that work together like a toolbox for handling life's challenges. First of all, there's acceptance, like letting yourself feel what you feel without trying to shove it down. The next up, you have cognitive diffusion, which helps you see your thoughts for what they are, just thoughts, not the ultimate truth. Being present is about tuning into the here and now instead of being stuck in the past or stuck in the future. The concept of self as context reminds you that you are more than your thoughts and emotions, like the sky that holds all of the weather. So in my research, I found that the coolest thing about ACT is how it's rooted in what's meaningful to you. So it helps you figure out what you care about the most, like your values, and then take action towards living a life that reflects those priorities, even when it's uncomfortable. So it's not about avoiding the hard stuff, it's about carrying it with you while you build a life that feels real and fulfilling. You can kind of think of ACT as a guide to getting out of your own way so you can live the life you want. Well, I thought it was pretty cool. Look into it if you want, there's tons of resources available. And on that note, let's get back to Jen.
She actually equipped me with a lot of tools from acceptance and commitment therapy, so ACT.
Mm.
So when I feel that coming on, even like in a public space, I can just engage in subtle ways, like focusing on my breath or like actually trying to be more aware of my inner world. And then when I got aware of my inner world, I focus on the outside world. There's like a really familiar practice where you have to name 5 things that you see, smell, hear, that stuff. And that
Yeah.
works really great for me as well, because then I really get in contact with the world around me again. Because like that fawning response, it really, it sucks me
Right.
in and I'm like totally unresponsive.
Yeah.
And when I get back to my environment, I can finally see it's shitty, but I'm not going to die. And that really like helps me in that moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good tools that I've picked up over the years and then forget to use when I need to.
Yeah,
Like,
true.
there's a tiger chasing me. I don't have time to breathe deeply. It's like, yes, there's no tiger. Take a
I
breath.
get that. Yeah.
It's okay.
Takes a
And
lot
that's
of
the thing, right?
work to be like really aware of that you can use it in that moment. That a lot of practice.
Yeah. It's helpful if you have people around who can remind you, hey, take a breath. Wait, yes, you notice I'm getting dysregulated.
Or
I
hey,
just,
your shoulders are up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. I had this really, I've had a couple of shitty months and I've really been struggling to be there for my partner. And we had a couple of big conversations recently and I feel so good right now. We kind of got back into alignment. And at some point she was like, hey, could you look at me? And I was like, we're having this big, important conversation. I was being as unmasked as I possibly could. And I said, no, like, no, I can't. And then I looked over and we kind of connected a little bit. And I was like, hey, and after the conversation was over and we kind of settled down a little bit, I said to her, I was like, hey, you asking me to look at you, I think is a request for me to be connected with you. Is that right? And she was like, yes. Like, great. My whole life, I've had people, kijk mijn ogen, look me in the eyes. Like,
Yeah.
like,
I can
have
still
eye
hear it.
contact, right? And it's making me, and I was like, I explained to her, it's like, hey, like, I'm happy to try to connect with you. I want to be present with you. And especially when we're having a hard time, I want to find ways for us to be in connection. And eye contact is extraordinarily hard for me. Can we talk about that? Can we talk about, is there another way that we can feel connected instead of eye contact? Or is there a way that you can tell me, hey, I would feel really connected to you if you look at me right now? Because then it's not a, you're weird for not looking at me. Then it's a, hey, I want connection. And eye contact helps me get connection. And in that world, I'm like, oh, you're not telling me off for being weird. You're naming what you need, which is connection. And I want to be in connection with you. And if eye contact is it, I'm willing to be in eye contact briefly. And the difference for me is profound.
It's really interesting. I really have to like sit with that one. But what comes up in my mind is that a lot of the communication that we use is not actually what we mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like we say something because we think that behavior bothers us. And for me personally, I tend to take a lot of things literally. So if someone says that to me, I really need to process what they actually mean, what lies underneath behavior instead of, oh, this person hates it when I don't look them in the eyes. It's more than that.
Right.
And it's beautiful, right? That you can have that conversation with each other and be vulnerable about that. And I really wish that was possible, like in a lot more interactions. Yeah.
What if it was?
the world would look very differently, I think. Yeah. Because
But I
I
think
feel like
it's
so many conflicts arise because we don't understand the actual meaning, like the actual message that we're trying to send. Because even in like when we're angry or we fight, there's actually this need for connection, right? It's not about wanting to be genuinely evil to each other.
right.
It's about connection. And I don't know. It's hard to see that like directly for me too, right? But it would be so beautiful if you could see that more. Yeah.
Could you give me an example of a time that you were miscommunicated with? And when you figured it out later, what the request actually was?
Well, this is kind of a funny one, I think. I live with my housemate. We're best friends, and well, he is allistic, neurotypical. I can't quite figure it out. But sometimes, a lot of the times, he's on a different wavelength than me. So we really need to do our best to understand each other. So we do a lot of work around communication and stuff like that. Um, Once I came downstairs and um, I think I was going to prepare food, just lunch or something, and he was standing in the door opening and he was like, "What are you going to do?" And just like very suggestive questions about what I was doing, how I was doing, blah, 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 or not even how I was doing. Um, and I felt like I really needed to answer these questions very literally, but I didn't understand what he wanted from me because he was just standing there. I was like, yeah, okay, so what do you want from me? And later on, when I fully processed that and I went upstairs, I sent him a text because we also tend to just text a lot. It's just easier.
Mhm.
And I asked him and he was like, yeah, I actually just wanted to ask if you wanted to have a conversation about how you were doing. I was like, why didn't you just say that? Because now I
Right.
didn't understand what your intentions were, and I really need clear, literal communication. So we actually misunderstood each other there. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, what you wanted was beautiful, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I got like, well, really irritated in the first place because I can't really stand it if some things are unclear or people want something from me, but I don't know, like it's fake language. Like,
I think actually, so the purpose of doing this podcast is ultimately writing a book, right? I'm working on this book called The Care and Feeding of Your Pet Autist.
oh,
And and this is the kind of advice that I really want to include. And I want it to be about like, hey, what are examples of vague language that sounds obvious to holistic people, but if you have a slightly literal mind, that you focus on the wrong thing. Like it took me a long time to realize somebody saying, "Hey, we're having a party tonight," was them inviting. I'd be like, "Oh, good for you."
yeah. And
Right? Like, "Oh, great. I'm glad you're having a party."
I can't help but wonder if like we're understanding it wrong or it's just like I don't know how to say it. In some way it's on their end as well because they're literally not saying what they want, right? They're like not making a request. They're just stating
Right.
something and then you have to guess.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I feel for a lot of holistic people, that is a really like if somebody tells you they're having a party, that's them inviting you to the party.
Yeah. And I'm
And I'm
like,
like,
okay,
oh,
nice. Good for you.
right, exactly. But that could have been so much easier if they had said, "Hey, we're having a party tonight. I'd love it if you came." Or, "We're having a party tonight. Uh, it would be great if somebody brought ice cream. Could you bring ice cream?" Like, then I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you want me to come to the party and bring ice cream and then leave, or do you want me to stay?" Right? And over time, eventually I figured out, hey, it's really you wouldn't invite somebody like, "Hey, I'm throwing a party tonight. Could you bring some ice cream and then leave?" That's not actually what people are like, even though that's literally what they are saying. That's
Yeah.
not what they need. I think after a while, I was like, okay, great. I need to. but there's no, like, how the fuck are you meant to figure that out? I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know.
I don't know
There's
either. And that's like so
uh,
funny for me personally because, it's not once that I come across these situations, right? But over and over again, I tend to like misunderstand it. And I'm like, what?
right.
Please tell me what's going on.
Well,
Yeah.
and in a professional world, that gets particularly hairy, right? If you are working with coworkers who consistently think they're communicating well with you and like make requests of what they want you to do, and then consistently you fail to do it because there was no request in there or somehow, and like it feels a little like I'm expected to read people's minds, but instead what is happening, like nobody expects you to read your mind, right? That's not a real thing. But what they're expecting is to understand what they actually mean, which is different from what they actually say.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Totally
Shrug
clueless.
emoji.
Same. Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Yeah. And I'm glad that I finally, well, got some coworkers, well, colleagues that are really understanding of this and just
Mhm.
really ask me like, or say to me like, no, this was not a statement. This was a request. Just so you know, it's a request. I want you to, and that's actually really nice
Right.
for me because then I know what they expect from me. And we also
Yeah.
have a lot of meetings about what we expect from each other. And I definitely bring in the direct language and communication.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And sometimes, like the interesting thing for an holistic, and this is of course an example. These are all examples of the double empathy problem. But I get the understanding. Like I am sometimes insulted when somebody over explains. Like, hey, and then they explain and then they explain and they explain. And really what they're trying to do is to love me by explaining exactly what it is they want. But I'm like, hey, I'm not an idiot. I understood that. But
Right.
that's me falling into the same trap that they're falling into, which is assuming that, like, so they're assuming I can read their mind and I'm assuming whatever. There's a lot of assumptions in there.
Yeah. And I'm jokingly saying, well, for you, it's like the other way around. And that's indeed what the double empathy is about. But I also say, and this is, of course, jokingly, that that's what it means to be neurotypical to like communicate in assumptions all of the time. And somehow
Right.
they get it or they don't. But I don't understand. I don't understand how you can like build on that with
Yeah.
connections, stuff like that, because it doesn't feel genuine or authentic or
And where are you at with your masking now? What do you feel is your edges of growth?
could you like rephrase that last part of the question because I'm not sure I understood.
Thank you for asking. Um, I think what I'm trying to ask is like, obviously you're on a journey with your own masking,
Yeah.
right? That's what we've been talking about for the past hour. Um, and I'm curious, like, do you have a sense of where are your growth edges? Like, where are you learning? What aspects of masking or unmasking are you currently feeling that most of your learning is happening?
So yeah, I think for me, um, it's definitely my face gestures. Like it's a very outward process of trying to come across as bubbly as possible, um, not trying to adjust my tone of voice too much because I think it sounds nicer. Um, and something I'm really practicing with right now, and I think that's really a challenge for me because I've always been a people pleaser, just like being honest here. Um, to really actually speak my mind, just how I think I want to say it instead of how I think someone needs to perceive it. And that's
Yeah.
fucking scary.
What's scary about it?
Because um, there's an unpredictable part about that because you don't know what might happen. You might like come closer to this person or the opposite will happen or anything in between. And not knowing what will happen is really scary. Um, yeah, I think it's just, um, I'm just really scared. I think that terrible things were are going to happen, but I know it's like not realistic at all. And I'm still trying to do some work around that, like what it really is. Um, but it's hard to get there because if you did it your whole life, it's just why, you know? And at the same time, I think it's not useful to really go into that because I might never discover why I do it. But I just want to focus on my intentions,
Mhm.
um, not doing it that much, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I get it. I get that unmasking is really scary.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I'm like, when I unmask, I spend a lot less energy.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like
true.
I can just relax into uh my own weird self. Um if people don't like it, they don't like it. I'm like the people pleaser in me is like, I want everybody to like me. But
Mm,
somebody reminded me, well, you don't like everybody. It's like, oh yeah, that's true. So why
yeah.
do you expect everybody to like you? I'm like,
Yeah.
good point. Good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And for me, the phrase that really helps is that people are going to think whatever they want about you regardless. So you might as well be yourself and let them judge that, quote unquote, instead of
Right.
you having to like expend so much energy. And yeah, it comes with a cost, a very high cost, actually. Yeah.
Would you say more about the cost of masking?
I think for me, basically, when I come home from my job, I tend to notice that I, well, mask a lot because it's still a process for me. And when I did that, I'm more prone to meltdowns or shutdowns. And I'm generally not an enjoyable person when I had to do it for, yeah, that much, that length of time. I don't know how to say it. So I feel like in the end, I'm feeling more dysregulated by
Hmm.
doing that, and that has like huge consequences, right? Because if I am going to melt down more often, shut down and stuff like that, it's harder to take care of myself. It's harder to be around the people that I love because I need to recharge that much. I need to be in bed actually a lot of the time, rest a lot. And it just really hurts because in a way I know that I would have like I would experience less of the downsides of being autistic if I just like, yeah, if I would be more me. And actually, um, I also recently like got into a burnout, and I think that's also the cost that comes with masking, that you're going to eventually burn out, and because you're like putting your energy in all these places that you could use for actually being present and be there, showing up as yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the hidden cost, right? For autistic people who are able to hold down a job, the cost is I have been in this office for 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours. And the only thing I have energy for now is to sit in my bathtub for 2 hours and do a crossword puzzle. Like I don't have it. I can't deal with more people. I can't go on a date. I can't enjoy anything. Like my ability to enjoy goes away. And part of me is like, wow, that's a lot to give to a job.
Yeah.
When an holistic person after work to go, let's go drinking, let's go clubbing, let's go whatever, living for the weekend. It's like, no, I need to spend the weekend hiding from the world because I spend the week working.
Yep.
And when I work as a consultant, I make sure to not work that many hours. It means that the rest of my life becomes so much better. But
Hmm.
I am lucky that I have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And if people think I'm lazy for working an hour a week, I'm sorry. Like the rest of my life gets much shittier if I work 40-hour weeks.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think, well, yeah, it's just that I really understand where you're coming from. Um, and it's just really unkind to yourself, right? To do this to yourself. And yeah, in a way you want to unlearn, but you also like, yeah, it takes weighing out the pros and cons, I think, because, and that's also like an important thing to mention is that you don't need to unmask everywhere in order to have the benefit or experience the benefits from it. Because at some places it's going to be like expected, like some neurotypical people even do it at a much lower rate than you,
Right.
or yeah. Um, but it's like really trying to see in which areas you want to be more of yourself so you can really connect with the world around you. Because for me personally, a lot of um, my authenticity goes lost when I do it. And sometimes I can't even hear someone speak because I'm that busy with processing how I come across. And that's
Right.
just, I don't want that. No,
Yeah. I don't want that for you.
no.
Um, can I share something that I'm noticing?
Yeah,
Um, I feel like I've done a lot of talking in this interview, and I feel like that actually makes me a bad interviewer
really.
because, yeah, my goal is to talk 20% of the time. Like you gave your time to be here and to generously come late at night and come and talk to me. And by doing this much talking, I feel like uh, I took some of your time, and I don't feel good about that.
Mm.
I don't think there's anything we can do about that, but I just wanted to name it because, yeah, I feel like I let you down a little bit, but I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Um, do you want to hear my thoughts about that?
Okay, I'm bad. Thank you for
Mhm. Yeah, I think for me personally, I thought it was very nice, to be honest, because uh, the way I communicate is when someone comes with a subject, I can really relate to that and hone into that, I think. And for me, that's really like the starter point of a conversation. So sometimes I actually need someone to activate me in that. So I don't think it's necessarily annoying or came across as like you taking too much space. Um, I've been told by friends that I am like quiet a lot of the time. Um, and I can talk, but I actually like it if someone carries the conversation more. So for me, it's also like, I think it's even related to this topic because before I started this podcast, I really came with this expectation for myself. Like, I need to talk a lot. I need to take up space. I need to do this, that, tell this, that. But I think in a way that I maybe didn't do it. I don't know. I talked, but maybe not that much that I expected. I think that is even unmasking in its own, right? that I didn't expect that of myself. And I was like, okay, I'm just heading, like going into this and I will see how it goes. And if I talk, I talk. And if I don't, I don't. So for me, it comes across like really different than your experience.
Mm.
How does that sound?
Well, I think this is a wonderful meta experience about communication, right? I had a discomfort and I shared it with you. And then you reflected back what your experience was, assuming you're not fawning, which is, you know, the
No,
next thought in my head.
I'm not.
Um, but I think this is me trying to model how I would love to be communicated with and to just own it. Hey, I have this feeling like I feel like I did too much talking. And then we get to have a conversation about it in real time. And I
Mhm.
wish the world was more like that, where if you have a feeling that comes up for you, that you say, hey, can I just check something with you? I have this story that I talk too much, or I have this story that at the beginning you're like, oh, English is not my first language. I'm worried about, and we figured it out, right? But
Yeah.
just putting that out there, I think takes some of the sharp edges off.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that too. And well, it's really like talking about like openly about the assumption you have that it might be not be all right with me. And I'm glad you spoke your mind about that. Because for me, actually, the thoughts that were going on in my mind were like, am I talking enough? Am I saying, but I didn't want to have an expectation for myself because that's what I need to practice for me personally. So I think it's all right. It's a message on its own. Yeah.
Mm, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions I love to end these interviews on. May I ask them of you?
Yeah, sure.
Um, what do you wish people could understand about autism?
Mm, yeah, I think that we should not um, assume what autism means to somebody and that it can present differently in everyone. Um, I just hope like the thing we talked about is that people will start to have more conversations about what autism means for each individual instead of having an expectation about it or a judgment or an assumption. And
Yeah.
I don't know, hopefully it can lead to a deeper understanding of the subject. And at the same time, what I want people to know is that many of my strengths also come from being autistic. So it's not always about deficits in every area. And I don't know, I really hope that a lot of people, including autistic people, of course, would understood more what autistic joy is and that it
Tell
could
me.
have a greater place in the world. Yeah. Um, so what autistic joy is?
Yeah, I'm super curious. Like, to you, what does autistic joy mean?
To me, it feels like this overwhelming joy about something I really love to see or experience. And I get so happy and excited about it. And I let myself sometimes even stim freely. And for me, it is mushrooms. For example, I like to see mushrooms, not actually do mushrooms. So you have to be very careful with that. Um, but like, I really like those classic mushrooms, the red ones with the white dots. I get so freaking excited. I'm like, oh my God, that looks so magical. Or just when I'm being understood and someone is just getting it like on a deeper level, I get this feeling like this burst of energy. And that's what autistic joy for me is. And I feel like if we would understand each other more and we would make more space for like the difference in people, that would occur more instead of the focus on deficits. Would be amazing.
Yeah. I actually specifically with amanita mushrooms, I have exactly the same thing. They're just like
Yeah. Amanita
found them in the
muscaria.
wild.
Oh, that's their full
Yes,
name. Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Um, oh,
It's great.
would you tell me a story of a time that you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
Yes. Yeah, that would be about that autistic conference that I was talking about earlier. Um,
Oh, tell me.
yeah, so that autistic conference is named called Outscape, and it is
Hmm.
based in England and is hosted every year. It's, I think, you can attend for 3 or 4 days, and then you have an extra day to really come off of the whole experience. Um, So many people that come there are autistic themselves, but the fun part and the good part is that neurotypical people are also welcome to be immersed in our world and see the roles being like reversed in a sense.
Hmm.
And what I loved most about it is that I could like truly be myself without like constantly having to mask. Um, I finally got a lot of like recognition back and forth. Um, and I don't know, it just clicked all of a sudden that this is where I belong. This is so nice that we like really want to like understand each other finally, and that there were so much accommodations actually. And for example, there is like this badge which can indicate if you want to communicate or not, if you're comfortable with that. There are like two separate dinner rooms that if you want to talk to people, you can go over there, or if you want a completely silent dinner, that's also available for you. Um, yeah, I was shocked when I got there because I was like, holy shit. And I could even like bring my plushie and carry it with me like publicly and no one would care. I was like, good, great. It was such a different world and I really felt seen that yeah, over there. And you know, I like even joked that it was my confirmation of being truly autistic because I just fit in. Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Is
This
it?
week, somebody at some point put a little sign on one of the tables saying "quiet table." It was in a
Oh.
full dining room. It was loud, but one table, quiet table. The expectation was like it's going to be loud, right? People are eating, but
Mhm.
there's no expectation of talking. And I sat down at the table, do it again, and I cried. It was so beautiful because I was just so overwhelmed that I wanted to eat, but I really didn't want to talk to anyone. And the fact that somebody took the time to put a little sign on the table saying quiet table. And I sat there, people sat down, they nodded, they smiled, and they ate and just kept their mouth shut. And I was like, thank fuck for that. Don't know whose idea it was. I don't know who did it or why. Ah, I was so grateful. I'm trying now.
That's all right.
Ah,
Yeah, it's crazy, right? That just these small things, quote unquote, can mean so freaking much to you.
and nobody was harmed by that.
Exactly.
There were 9 other tables where you could talk your head off.
Yeah.
And we didn't ask anybody else to be quiet. Just don't talk to me while I'm eating my food. I need some space.
Yeah. And maybe the most important
Oh,
thing, no offense taken.
right,
Yeah.
right. Like if you want to talk, great. There's 9 other tables for you. There's one table for people who just need to sit and eat and either enjoy. Somebody was there just enjoying their food. Other people were clearly thinking about stuff or whatever. But
Hmm.
zero costs. Really, no accommodation at all, except somebody took a pen and a piece of paper, and I'm like, thank fuck for that. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
And sometimes that's all it takes, right? And it's for me personally when I got finally immersed in that world because you rarely
Mhm.
get the opportunity to come together with so much neurodivergent people in one space. And it's
Right.
just another thing I noticed really is that I unclenched my jaw. Like I'm not used to like um feeling that because I'm constantly tense in my face from all the laughing and all the facial expressions. And the first thing I discovered there was that everything went. And I was just tired because of the event, not because of the masking.
Have you, and I mean, not everybody likes touch, but have you ever had somebody massage your cheek muscles?
No, I actually did it myself. And I actually want
It's
to do
like,
it
oh,
more
I,
often. It works, yeah.
you get to have the break. It's so wonderful. So
Yeah.
yes, it's wonderful to do to yourself. And actually, I invite you to at some point find your friend and invite them to do it for you. It's like just sitting back and letting somebody massage those muscles and say, hey, you don't need to speak. You don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
I did that. I've done that exactly once. And I was like, oh,
Oh, that sounds goes so
hi.
great, actually. Yeah.
Right. Find a friend, ask them. It's weird, but also wonderful.
Yeah.
Jen, thank you so much for so generously giving your time and opening your heart and talking with me. This was absolutely delightful.
I really loved it as well. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. You can find us on TikTok on Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, and on the web on autistic.fm. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Camps. If you know anybody who would be a great guest on the podcast, don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us on hello@autistic.fm or reach out via the socials. See you next week.